Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back. Let's talk about Neptune retrograde and also touch a little bit on Jupiter retrograde because both of them, Neptune is about to go retrograde today, and that's on the 25th, 26th of June, depending on your location. Jupiter went retrograde just recently. And those two are the rulers of Pisces, so that's quite significant, especially since Neptune is in Pisces and Jupiter is also in Pisces, although it will retrograde back into Aquarius. Interesting, both those planets actually correspond to the search for meaning and truth. Both of those archetypes, both of those planetary energies speak to those experiences and desires and processes in our life. So both of them going retrograde is a pretty big deal, I think, relative to the focus of our life inwardly. I was laughing. I was reading some things that Jeffrey Wolf Green has to say about Neptune retrograde, rather, and one of the things that he points to is, and this speaks more to people who are born with Neptune retrograde, which I am. My Neptune is retrograde at birth, or was. Those souls actually tend to want to sleep more. And I'd never heard anybody say that before. So when I was reminded of that, I was kind of laughing to myself. So if I fall asleep during this video, something will wake me up. No. Anyway, I just thought it was interesting because I had a look at, just some people that I know really well. I know them well enough to know about their sleep life or sleep cycles. And I found it interesting that the people that I did look at who don't have Neptune retrograde don't sleep as much as I do. I found that quite fascinating. So have a think about that and let me know if your Neptune is retrograde in your chart at birth and if you relate to that. See, Neptune corresponds to that part of our consciousness which connects directly to divine source consciousness, creation to all things. And so it is the infusion of consciousness, Neptune, which takes on the form, right? It's the water, it's literally water, which takes on the form. So the very simple example, which I frequently use, is if you put water in a cup, the water will take the form of the cup, won't it? Whatever shape it is, whether it's a cup, a bowl, whatever, the water takes that form, right? And expresses itself through that. So that's more or less how the Neptune energy corresponds to our physical experience here on Earth. It's consciousness taking on form and experiencing itself, as it were. So given that Neptune corresponds to sleep and the land of dreams, the other really important thing to remember, well, actually, before I go there, let me just say that Neptune stays retrograde for about half of the year. And the other half of the year, of course, it's direct. So there's a collective shift, obviously, that will happen with Neptune going retrograde. And then there's the personal experience that we have as well. And Neptune itself actually does correspond to the collective unconscious and consciousness. Because it's going retrograde at around about 23 degrees of Pisces, those of you that have planets between 18 to about 25 degrees of any of the mutable signs will possibly feel the shift more personally. You will feel it anyway, regardless, because wherever Neptune is transiting in your birth chart, well, that's the area of life that this Neptune transit and retrograde process will be speaking to. So the mutable signs, for those of you that are not aware, of course, Pisces, Virgo, Gemini, and Sagittarius. So those are the four mutable signs. So if you have planets in any of those signs, as I said, between 18 to 25 degrees, then this Neptune retrograde cycle perhaps will be felt more personally. The thing to remember about Neptune is that its influence and manifestation or experience is very, very subtle, extremely subtle. It's like a mist, like a fog. It's not a harsh, in your face, um, overt type of energy and frequency. It's ever so subtle, and it's working in the layers of our consciousness and the unconscious components within us in extremely powerful ways, but ever so subtle that the everyday conscious waking state, our mind, our left brain linear thought processes, um, doesn't really grasp what's going on there. It's the unconscious components. So Neptune will be retrograde until the 3rd of December this year. So it's approximately, what, 5.5 months, thereabouts. Neptune going retrograde is a process and a journey where we're turning within in order to experience and connect to this inner journey to spirit, if you like, also to our own unconscious sort of components. It's interesting actually because Neptune corresponds to sleep and dreams, right? And it is said that the dreams that we have, as in the dreams we have when we go to sleep, reflect basically what the soul is essentially trying to purge. And if you think about a lot of the dreams that you have, while you're asleep, I'm sure all of you have had dreams at times that when you remember them, you sort of think to yourself, well, what the hell was that about? That was just so weird. There was just no, you couldn't find meaning out of it. It was just a very disjointed, weird dream of bits and pieces coming together that just didn't really make much sense. I have that a lot, and I also have prophetic dreams too. But basically, the soul is purging itself because what it's purging is there's two layers to this. One layer is that the everyday waking state where we are awake and conscious and moving about our day and our business. The mind is absorbing and processing a lot of data, right? A lot of impressions, feelings, reflections, perceptions, and so forth. And a lot of the stuff that the mind is taking in and processing is fairly useless sort of data or information. So consciousness, when you go to sleep and consciousness sort of takes over, if you like, it goes through this process of filtering through all the crap that we have absorbed and taken into our psyche, as it were, and it starts clearing it out. That's the purging process. And it also does that from the level of, you may have a lot of dreams that actually don't have anything to do with this life, as in specifically circumstances to this current life, but the soul is having dreams that correspond to past lives. And again, it's having those dreams and making those connections in order to filter and process and discard and purge. And so when Neptune is retrograde, this is a very powerful process that can be activated as well. So dream life, sleep life, withdrawing from the world, from this reality, and all that sort of stuff becomes sort of more prominent when Neptune's retrograde. There is a temptation for many who perhaps have not integrated Neptune in a more conscious way, where, remember that Neptune, in through the personality level, really highlights the world of glamour, and it highlights our ideals, dreams, and fantasies, the things that we dream about and desire and want. And we may or may not have those things, but it's the aspects of life that we dream about that could be somewhat disillusional, or just pure fantasy. And there's healthy sort of fantasies that we can have, that are just our own little private um, moments and experiences through various, whether that's through journaling or artistic work or whatever it may be. I mean, so many of the greatest sort of poets and um, artists, painters, musicians, and so forth. They tune into this energy very much, right? That's how they get very inspired as well. So Neptune acts as a real source of inspiration. Inspiration, as I've often said, we break that word down. It means in spirit. So when we are in spirit, we are feeling inspired, right? So on that personality, glamorous type of fantasy kind of level, the Neptune retrograde can speak to, for certain individuals, it may be the process of just wanting to really escape. Escapism corresponds to Neptune. What are we escaping from? We are escaping from the harshness of reality. And that's a typical process that Piscean archetypes have as an underlying sort of theme in their life. And that can be bittersweet, because the sweet part is that they can live in a world in their own imagination that's just so it's so magical, it's so uplifting, it's so fulfilling for them relative to the way they are dreaming it. But then the nature of reality out there still exists, so it's a denial of that the harshness of reality. So Neptune retrograde can take us through those sorts of processes as well, where life is just so difficult at the moment. I'd rather just completely tune out of that and just go into my own world. And there's a healthy level to that, and then there can be an unhealthy level. And the healthy level, of course, is when we tune into our spiritual life, spirit life, in order to realize deeper truths. That's what Neptune inspires and invokes. When it's going retrograde, particularly, it can facilitate a process for us where we dive deeper in order to actually connect deeper to spirit, our own higher levels of spirit, divine source, creation to all things, our own divinity, remembering that we are infinite, those sorts of things, which can stimulate really powerful imagination, creativity, artistic endeavors, inspiration. And if we're not sort of working with Neptune on an integrated level in that way consciously, then it will be possibly for some people the desire to just totally escape the shitty reality that's before us. And frequently that comes through, substances, drugs and alcohol and things like that. Addictions, all forms of addiction correspond to Neptune. It can also bring in matters of being totally and utterly confused, deception, whether you are being deceived or deceiving others, just unable to be realistic about what's going on. So it's a very, very tricky energy because it's very, very subtle. These themes, they don't, as I said before, that they don't come in a very overt, obvious way. They're happening in very subtle sort of layers in our consciousness. So the component of escapism, which can bring about also matters of feeling like you are victimized. Frequently, the Neptune Pisces archetype, when that is strong in an individual and they are escaping from the world, there's two sides to that. One side is that they want to live in their own sort of reality, if you like, and connect deeper to their own values, which would be more aligned with the soul as opposed to the societal values that are in play depending on where you live and where you come from and what sort of environment you've grown up in and so forth. But it's rebelling against that consensus sort of status and that consensus reality of the values to life, right? And it enables us to tune deeper into those parts of ourselves where we can find more truthful sort of values that correspond to our soul's journey, right? And what we are needing to realize and wake up to as well. And if it's not that, then it's more likely to be rebelling against the societal sort of values and version of reality that's projected and that's implied, and that we're all sort of subject to in one way or another, and just totally escaping it, not wanting to have anything to do with it. And because it's so harsh, so that there's this level of, I can't deal with this life. I can't deal with these demands, responsibilities, expectations that everyone and everything around me has. It's just bullshit. I'm over it. I'm done. I'm just going to withdraw into my own little sphere and plane. So it can also bring up that sort of victim mentality where, I'm always unlucky. I always have bad luck. Life is so shit. Life is so difficult. I don't want anything to do with this. I'm just going into my own kind of space inside me. Pisces, the dream, create my own little reality, my own little world. So it can bring up a lot of these sorts of themes. On the other hand, it's also going through Neptune retrograde, is also taking us through a process where our inner structures are being dissolved. First of all, Neptune going retrograde implies an inward journey, and Neptune is the body that corresponds to dissolving all form and structure. So there'll be a fairly, a prominent sort of process for all of us. It's not very easy to understand and to be conscious of, unless, of course, you are, practicing a lot of meditation, journaling, having very conscious sort of set out times in your schedule where you do actually just sit back and take time to be still, right? And reflect and process on whatever's going on within. I mean, the opposite to that is to just consistently remain, so busy on that external level, so engaged with the life out there that we don't stop to actually take note and take notice to what we are experiencing within us. And that's typically an experience that happens because when we actually stop to stand still, and this is the Neptune retrograde, it can also take us into a zone or an area where there's this kind of existential void. And it feels different things for different people, but it's not necessarily an easy thing to confront within ourselves, because underneath that existential void, where there's a lot of fear through that existential void, and that's the Virgo Pisces polarity. That's why Virgo has to be doing something all the time. It has to have a list of to do, a list of things that it needs to do. Virgo's always needing to be. It needs to feel like it's always constructive, right, and engaged and active and doing things. Because if it stops, it is faced with this opposite polarity, Pisces, where there's this sense of an existential void. And that's a really creepy sort of feeling for the Virgos. um, but underneath that existential void, when you can break through that barrier, is actually that deeper connection to spirit, right? To divine source creation, to all things, to realizing a deeper meaning and deeper truths to your life and to who you are and to who you are becoming and to how you are evolving. So Neptune takes us through all these kinds of processes, right? And don't be surprised if you feel like you want to sleep a lot more while Neptune goes retrograde, because it implies um, Neptune connects to sleep, dreams, the unconscious states, taking time out, stepping out of the hustle and bustle of the external structure of reality, and it's dissolving the forms of structures that you have built and created internally within, some of which are necessary and are very healthy, and some of which are more based on fear, perhaps, and self protection, um, resistances and things like that. So the Neptune retrograde can help dissolve a lot of that form. It creates a sense of, or a process of dissolution. That's what happens with Neptune retrograde. Um, so it's important to look at where Pisces is in your birth chart, because that's the area of life, that house, which speaks to an area of life that may have a few different layers to it. That's the area of life that's going through this inward process where you will either step into a much more reflective time with your spiritual realizing, with the desire for meaning, finding more meaning to whatever is going on in your life and wherever you're at the moment. And or it'll be the area where you will just totally want to escape the reality of what's going on there. It's just too difficult, it's too confusing. I don't want to know about it, so I'm just going to take the escape route. And that could be through just sleeping a lot as well. Souls who I mean, this is not necessarily true for every single person, but there is some correlation between souls who tend to want to sleep a lot more. That's got largely to do with the soul having had a lot of experiences around trauma, whether that's this life and previous lives or both. And the sleeping component takes it, it sort of takes it away from having to feel and face and deal with those traumas. So the sleep acts as a bit of a comfort zone, if you like, a space where it can just escape and not have to face those sorts of things. There's that side to it, and there's just the side of Neptune corresponding to sleep, meaning that we just want to tune into other realities, other levels of consciousness within us. Sleep is an altered state of consciousness, right? So when we go to sleep, there is this sense of release as well. Because when you go to sleep every night, typically most of us will just, it's a Neptune experience every night. We go to sleep. We lay down, eventually we fall asleep, and there's this process of letting go. It's a natural letting go. You're not laying there holding on to your body, controlling your breath, for example, right? You're not controlling the experience of sleep. That's us actually letting go. And the 12th house, Neptune and Pisces, all corresponds to letting go, surrendering. So what do we do every night? We surrender every night. Every night we do it. We go through this Neptune experience. But while Neptune is retrograde, these sorts of themes become more prominent in our journey, in our life sort of experiences. So there's also a great emphasis, if you like, with Neptune going retrograde in Pisces around some of the characteristics, or some of the characteristics that are described by Neptune, Pisces energy, which is around empathy, sensitivity, and compassion. Because the opposite to that is to be critical and judgmental, which is Virgo. So the emphasis on empathy, sensitivity, and compassion could be something that we actually need to give more to ourselves as well, not be so hard on ourselves, for instance. And that may also correspond to the way we view life and others around us as well. These sorts of themes become more prominent. Very subtle, and it's all happening on the inner plane, but it's happening. It's a really powerful time for, as I said, connecting to spirit, inspiration, which I have to deal with this.
You alright, baby? You okay? You ate too much. You ate too quickly. Okay?
Sorry, guys. I do have a baby girl, Coco, and she was just getting ready to throw up a bit. Okay, she seems like she's okay. Where was I? So I was talking about reflection, visualization, inspiration, journaling, dreams, things like that, meditation. It's a it's a time to nurture those softer sort of experiences and practices and disciplines, if you like, because there's a lot of richness in uh, Neptune retrograde with experiences, having experiences on those levels. There's an invitation, an invocation to really go within. And so, if we choose to do that consciously with awareness, there's a lot to be gained through this process. And there's a lot to be gained through um, the dissolving of certain forms within our structures in terms of what's being accumulated, created over, a certain amount of time or lifetimes. Um, and again, like I said, with the whole sleep thing, there's a lot of clearing out. One thing which also speaks to this is it is important to understand that the process of sleep, one of the reasons is so primal and so important um, to our life experience and journey is because the the healing and the releasing and the unconscious components that is sorting through various dynamics and narratives and past experiences and traumas and all sorts of unconscious content and projected material. All of that is actually being worked through and sorted through and cleared through and purged through the soul when we go to sleep. We think that we're actually doing so much more when we are awake and we are participating and engaged in life with our work, our responsibilities to our family, our activities, whatever it is that's going on in our life. We think that that takes, you know, that takes precedence, over everything else, and that's the most important work that we're doing. And yes, it is important, but it's not the most important. There's so much powerful work going on from the soul every night when we go to sleep, and we don't really think about that, but that's what's happening every night. There's there's so much healing and purging and clearing going on that we are just completely unconscious about. And also in what is it? It is in through traditional Chinese medicine and practices around health, the body, and healing. They have a system where there are certain hours in the day and the night, for that matter, that correspond to various organs in the body uh, purifying and clearing things out without our actually doing anything, without us. I mean, we can facilitate that process by, if we have awareness around that, then at certain times of the day or night, it would be better to not ingest this type of liquid or this type of food, for instance, because there are certain hours in the night where your liver, for example, is cleansing and purifying itself. And so if you're ingesting toxins at those particular hours of the night, then that's going to interfere and interrupt with the natural process of what your liver is actually naturally, organically doing, filtering, clearing out, and so forth. So that's just another example of even just the physical anatomy, the physiology of our body and what's going on. So that's how intelligent this consciousness is in terms of how it's created our body. There's so much that we don't do that, as I said, we think that everything, all the value and meaning is so ascribed to the external reality and the successes and achievements and things that we're doing out there. But there is so much else going on, in our sleep, through dreams, through the soul work, and just even our own physicality of our body, and the organs in our body are actually going through various processes. And this happens 24 hours around the clock. So, it's pretty magnificent when you think about it. So paying attention to our sleep, right? Being aware of just how important the sleep state is on those levels. We give a greater sense of appreciation and understanding to that, and realizing just how important this process is every night that we go to sleep and surrender and let go. There's so much going on. It's not just a case of I'm going to go and sleep for 5, 6 hours and I'm going to get up and I start again. There's just so much going on. But anyway, Neptune retrograde really amplifies a lot of this stuff. It really takes us back into the natural sort of realm and domain of Neptune, if you like, because Neptune direct is trying to assimilate a reality through the filter of Neptune on that external level. And Neptune really doesn't have anything to do in its essence with the material world. It is infused into the material world through every single human being and every form and structure that you see. It speaks through that. But the essence of Neptune is it's literally an energy. You can't put words around it, you can't frame it, and you can't hold on to it, and you can't contain it. It's like the water in the ocean. Can you hold the water in your hands? Absolutely not. So Neptune going direct is trying to find its way through the shapes and forms that it's actually integrating into its sphere of experience, meaning us. But when it goes retrograde, it goes, I feel, through the meaning of retrograde and through the meaning of Neptune and what it basically symbolizes. It's a much more aligned, if you like, energy for Neptune to be retrograde, because it goes into the inner unconscious domain, which is what it rules, what it really corresponds to, what the essence that actually describes it. So it's really powerful for those reasons. Things like psychic dreams, imagination, as I said, spiritual mediumship, um, psychic downloads, the mystic being activated and inspired within us, all those sorts of realms that are in the typical consensus reality, not really, for the most part, not necessarily thought about a lot or valued a great deal, or even understood for that matter. So, for those that are more inclined to operate in that way in their life, this is a really beautiful opportunity for invocation and inspiration to connect even deeper to realizing your own nature, your own truth within. Remember, truth is a pathless land. Krishnamurti said that. So your truth is different to my truth. It's the idea that this truth is right and this truth is wrong. That's just a man-made left brain linear process, judgment, evaluation, etc., based on one's perception, beliefs, morals, and so forth. But truth doesn't have the ultimate truth. It doesn't have form. It doesn't have values associated to it, really. It's got nothing to do with judgment. It's got nothing to do with any of those things. Those are all humanistic type of experiences and things that we learn, conditioned sort of models and models of behavior or beliefs or experiences that we integrate into our psyche, into our inner structures as well. And so it's a little bit like the Neptune vibration takes us into a sphere where once you go in there, it can be quite daunting because you've got it might feel like you've got no anchor, you've got nothing to kind of hang on to because there's no form. And form, the external reality, gives us a sense of boundaries, structure. We know where this begins and where that ends. This road starts here and it finishes down there. I'm going to get up and, make breakfast for my kids and take them to school, and then I'm going to do da 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 da. That's the Saturn external world reality. But the Neptune domain, when we go in there, it doesn't have these forms and structures. There is form relative to Neptune when we go into our own inner forms that we've actually constructed through many lifetimes, and including this one, of course. But the invitation is to go in and to just to let go, to let go into a sphere, a space where the only way that you can feel, I suppose, confident and safe in that space is to completely surrender and trust to the highest will, including your own and the highest divine will. It's not an easy thing to do, but it is an invitation to experience that more. Or if for people who haven't never even thought about this, to entertain the prospect and the possibility of a journey around this kind of experience. And it's going to look and feel different for every single one of us. Um, okay. The interesting thing as well is because it's dissolving certain forms, it's also going to morph back into something else. So it might dissolve this particular form over here, but it will eventually then morph into something else because it has to. So that's that's an interesting thing to kind of contemplate on, right? Because there's a process of dissolving and morphing into something else, which is it's kind of like a rebirth process. It's a bit like a Pluto type of experience from the point of view of deconstructing and then reconstructing, dying to something and then being reborn to something else. It's a very similar kind of process, except it's not as intense and as overt as Pluto's energy can be. This is a very subtle inner experience that goes on that is directly rooted to the consciousness that we are, the ultimate consciousness that we are, which is infinite. Um, so the gift offered here is to open ourselves to higher centers, to our actual center as well, in order to facilitate again the process of alignment within, and to disconnect a little bit, not entirely, but disconnect a little bit from that external reality, from everything that's going on, and just check in with ourselves, with where we are at inside ourselves. It doesn't matter how busy we are and how much we've got going on, there's just as much or more going on inside. But the question becomes, can you go into that place, into that space, and pause and be still and reflect and feel and intuit what's going on there? It's probably a really great time for for therapeutic work with a therapist, or counseling work, or any therapeutic type of practitioner that can facilitate this process with you. Or you can do it on your own through your own practices of meditation, art, creativity, imagination, visualization, dream journaling, and so forth. There's so many ways that we can facilitate this process, which is very, very powerful for our spiritual essence and our spiritual life, which is ultimately what truly, truly sustains us, and what really brings a very deep and profound sense of fulfillment. Because the inner and the spirit and the soul and the inner sort of landscape, if you like, which has no form, as it were, is not dependent on the external reality to be how we want it to be in order for us to feel content or happy. Think about it. When we feel pissed off or unhappy or upset or angry relative to what's going on in our external life, it is typically because something has changed that we have no control over. That's what pisses people off. That's what makes people unhappy. And there's like a gazillion of examples that could be, said about that. And so the fact is that we don't actually have control over what is going on out there. Things can change in our external life like that. We don't have control over that. But we do have control. I don't know if control is the right word actually, but we do have a sense of, a deeper sense of self empowerment when we are activating the inner domains of the soul, the spiritual self, our spiritual life, our spiritual center. So the more we can nurture that, the more we can sustain that, the more we can actually deal with the influx and impermanence of that external world, because that's always going to be impermanent. It's always going to go through ups and downs. There's always going to be change. And some of the changes that happen are, intense, cataclysmic, difficult, challenging. Some are wonderful, whatever. But it's all temporary, all of it. So I couldn't think of a better reason to inspire and encourage somebody to establish and form some kind of connection and understanding with their inner world, with their inner spirit and soul, and how to nurture and develop that further. So Neptune retrograde is an invocation, an invitation for those sorts of journeys if we so choose to participate. If we don't, then, the Neptune retrograde, as I said, there'll be again a gazillion of different examples of how it plays out for different people. But if we're not working with it consciously, then it can bring up a lot of matters around feeling like our life's out of control. I want to escape, the craziness. I can't deal with this reality anymore. I'll just drink myself to sleep every night. I'll just get stoned every night, or whatever it is for different people. And that's it's a bit dangerous because it can be totally. We can delude ourselves in so many ways on that level, and we can also become a victim of our life circumstances and feel completely disempowered. And I don't think anyone really wants to feel like that. There's a lot of people that do, and all of us may feel that to some extent at certain stages in our life as well. It just depends what's going on, right? But this is the thing with Neptune retrograde, it's just a reminder, because anything that's going retrograde is a revision. Revision. So what are we revisioning or revising? Our spiritual essence, our soul life, and how in touch we are with that or out of touch. And what are the levels that need to be dissolved at this point in time with Neptune now going retrograde. And it's till the end of the year, so you've got plenty of time to work with this. And again, as I said, it's not an overt dynamic energy. It's very, very subtle, but do never underestimate subtleness for not being powerful. In fact, quite often, some very subtle processes that take place are so much more powerful than what appears to be extremely dynamic and overt and intense. So, yeah, again, it just depends on the person. So, have a think about where Neptune is transiting in your birth chart at the moment. That area of life is being affected in the ways or impacted or invited into those spheres of the things that I described. if it is forming aspects to your nodes, your personal planets, even the outer planets. The outer planets would be more, well, you won't have Pluto in Pisces. You may have Pluto in Virgo, though, which means if you have it between 18 to 25 degrees, Neptune will be opposite that Pluto. That would be a really fascinating transit. Those two outer planets are very, they're transcendental energies, so not easy to work with, but incredibly powerful. We're talking about Pluto, soul, deepest, most powerful transformations that we encounter versus being opposite Neptune. So there's some very profound transformative process going on with our understanding of spirit, life, reality, and so forth. It's more, there's more to it than that, but that's just an example. And of course, if it's aspecting your personal planets, depending on the nature of the archetype, the planet that it's aspecting, Neptune to the Sun is a really difficult transit. If I'm going to be honest, okay, it's not easy. Think about the sun is our, it's the conscious sort of structure of our conscious beingness. You know, it's your personality, right? It's your ego. It's the daily sort of conscious state of waking everyday life, you know, and Neptune symbolizes the opposite to that. It's not about conscious structure and form. It's about dissolving that. So you can imagine Neptune to the sun would really interfere with the psychological structures of the ego boundaries, and there can be a sense of threat there. It's not an easy transit, by the way. There's more to it than that. So it depends, you know, if Neptune is forming a conjunction, square, or opposition to any of your planets, it will bring into the sphere of Neptune retrograde the meaning of that planet, whatever it means. If it's Mercury, it's got to do with your mind, doesn't it? Your thinking, your communications, your siblings, you know, all that sort of stuff. Neptune Mercury transits, you know, oh boy, they are so tricky. But if you have Neptune conjunct your Mercury or opposite your Mercury or square your Mercury, I would highly encourage you to be really, really diligent about your contractual and verbal agreements, because I have seen this so many times. People agree to something that they actually did not completely understand, and it ends up being quite disastrous. So, just a word of caution. So there's many examples depending on what Neptune's hitting off. Now, it could be on your ascendant, it could be on your descendant, it could be on the MC, the top part of your chart, could be on your IC. That has a whole level associated with it, of course, through the filter or experience of Neptune being retrograde. But wherever it is a process of going within. And the going within, finally, just to repeat once more, we can either activate that journey consciously and integrated with healthy practices, or we can just fall into victim mode, escapism, and take that route. You know, so it depends who you are, what's going on, and what you choose to do. But hopefully, by hearing some of what I've had to share today, it will facilitate, you know, whatever it is you needed to hear out of this reading today. So it's a full moon in Capricorn today. I think we need to kind of wait, you know, a couple of days to allow the energy to reach its maximum peak and then to slowly start to dissipate, I guess, before we perhaps start to see what it's brought to light for us. In some cases, it's already brought very specific things to light for us. It has for me, for instance. So I'm interested to hear your opinions on that too. And by the way, just finally, it's without needing to do a Jupiter retrograde video, because everything I've said today, you can actually apply this to Jupiter. Um, it's slightly different because Neptune and Jupiter are different archetypes, but the fact that they are both retrograde at the same time in the same sign is yeah, it's pretty It's pretty auspicious to me. It's pretty, I think it's a good thing, actually, because Jupiter is always the the frequency that brings a level of support into our life. It gives encouragement, support, confidence. It brings certain aspects of opportunities or abundance or blessings into our life. So, Jupiter going retrograde in Pisces and Neptune going retrograde in Pisces, there's an invitation through the things that I spoke about, with the support and help of Jupiter in play as well, about all those things. So, it's actually a great thing. It's quite a blessing, quite a blessing. Just a question of how we each choose to step in. See you guys soon. Thanks for listening, and leave your comments and questions below. And sending you all much love, and see you soon. Bye.